we'll just give Councillor Lexstrom a minute to get his
Thanks,
chair
I'm
adjusted.
ready to go, Your Worship. Ready to go.
Good morning. We'll call the regular meeting of City Council to order for Monday, December 3rd. Our first order of business this morning, and before I get into the agenda, I would like to extend a sincere condolences to, we lost a real amazing community leader on the weekend, our colleague Fred Jarvis, who was the mayor of Taylor for I think 28 or 30 years. I think all of us got to know Fred over the years as that icon in the region representing his community, and he did that with a passion and purpose, and around the province. Fred was so well known as that leader of Taylor, and unexpectedly on the weekend we lost Fred, and so we sincerely want to pass on our sincere condolences on behalf of Mayor, Council, and the City of Dawson Creek to Fred's family and the entire community of Taylor, because Fred was he was their dad and for a long time. So our first order of business this morning is our delegations 2.1. We have Nicole Palfy in as the Associate Publisher of the Dawson Creek Mirror, and she's going to present some Reader Choice Awards. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
It's good to be here. This is my fun day every year.
Christmas.
Because I get to make everybody smile.
Yeah. Nice.
We're going to do it in a little bit different order this year. We're not going to give Dale his first this year. So we're going to start
You
with...
gave that away?
I kind of have a feeling everybody has a heads up. The best fundraising event this year was the Terry Fox Run.
Oh, good.
And we had about over 400 voters this year, so thank you. It's kind of nice.
I just want to say though, we need volunteers, so volunteer. So we did raise a lot of money, but we didn't actually have to run this year just because of lack of volunteers. So thank you for those that donated, but volunteers, terryfox.org.
And thank you to Shaylee, because Shaylee really has been the leader of that Terry Fox Run and kept it going in our community, so thank you. Well deserved.
Okay, and we have a couple of best places for in our city. So we have the best place for a picnic is Kin Park.
All right.
You're giving this to me. Levi. Good job.
Thank you.
Good job.
And this is this goes to the staff of Dawson Creek, the park staff, seasonal, and David Siemens, the head gardener, does a really good job. So well deserved on there.
You might as well stay here. I think we got the best place for biking, the Dawson Creek Walking Trails.
Wow.
And what is the best place for walking, the Dawson Creek Walking Trails.
Yay, good job.
I'm gonna let you ride your motorcycle. Thank you.
Not those kind of puppies.
Okay.
Okay, so now I have the privilege of presenting the Best People Award. The best firefighter, Mark Sutton.
All right.
Yay!
Congratulations.
Thank you.
7:20.
Great job.
Good job, yay.
And our honored RCMP, Best RCMP Officer, Raylene Jones.
Yay!
Good job. Good job. Good job.
I'm starting to think that it's more of who you know now in the community than what you know, after now serving Dawson Creek for 13 years here.
Wow.
So I think a lot of it has to do with that I'm out there and the people of the community know who I am.
This year we're going to put the awards in a little differently. We're actually naming the top 3 votes in every category.
Oh, cool.
And there are top 3 votes in every category.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
Raylene.
Thank you.
And I think it's absolutely representative of how people appreciate the role.
Thank you. And our best civic leader.
Thank you so much.
And last but definitely not least, our best city employee, Lloyd Garvin.
All right, Lloyd.
Great job. Great job.
Well, thank you very much. This is the second time I've got this award. And if it wasn't for Barry Raynard and the parks, people do an amazing job of keeping our flower beds going good and that. So I'd just like to extend my thanks to them because it helps my job look a lot better, and I try to do the best I can. And after receiving the other award and then this award, I'm going to have to work hard for the next 7 years.
I always said this, I think there's two guys that I wouldn't want running for civic politics, and that's Jason, our waste management collector, and Lloyd. Great job, everybody. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Nicole.
Next item is our, we have a delegation coming at 11 o'clock for Urban Systems. Item 3, new councillor business. Anyone? Item 4 is our minutes, 4.1, the minutes of our regular meeting of council of November 19th for adoption. Councillor
So
Wilbur, seconded. Councillor Kemp. Any errors or omissions in the minutes? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Any business arising out of the minutes? Councillor Lexter?
Just through you, your worship, to Duncan. Have we heard anything from CN yet? In the issue raised?
So through your worship, no, I haven't heard anything from Jocelyn yet, and I actually haven't gotten back to her. There was a request for a little bit of additional information on what communities have done some of these steps, and I actually am glad it hasn't come forward yet because I haven't got back to her yet. So.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other councillor business? Correspondence, 6.1. We have a letter from Rick Powell and Mike Geist from Sundance Canyon Homes, request to reconsider Section 57 on title. Duncan, do you want to give a little bit of an overview on this? Because this happened, and some of this prior to this council.
Yeah, so through your worship, 6.1 is a letter from Sundance Canyon Homes. So August 21st, our building inspector made a recommendation for a Section 57 note against title, which is essentially a note on the title for any future purchaser or anybody doing a title search on that building that indicates the foundations for these buildings did not have a building permit. With this Section 57, Sundance had the ability to provide some comments to council. That's what they've provided here today. You'll notice there was a bit of a lag in between when we originally had the report come forward and this response. They had asked for an extension, which was granted to them due to some unforeseen circumstances. And in short, this is their response to council on why they don't believe a Section 57 should be on title. Kevin, do you have anything else you want to add on this one? Nope, that's it.
I think you covered it.
I think we got it all there. So the appropriate action now, there's a couple options of council. From this, council can be satisfied in the correspondence from the owner and from the building inspector and direct the corporate officer to put a notice on title. Brenda, that's the appropriate language?
Yes.
Or if council wanted some additional information, that would also be another option.
Thank you. So, Councillor Parslow?
Just a question to staff. Are there any reasons why, what are the reasons we would not respond positively to the request contained in the last paragraph of the letter? What are your reasons for advising not to do that?
So the last paragraph is requesting that the city does not implement a Section 57 at this point.
Yes.
Correct? So really the Section 57, and this is where I'll lean on Kevin and Brenda a little more, the Section 57 is to protect a future purchaser of this property. Kevin? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yep, so through your worship. The note simply states that some parameters have not been met, such as a building permit or some inspections, and it's just to protect a future owner. When they go through the process of purchasing and do a title search, this would pop up and bring awareness to it. and it's just a protection piece for those future owners.
And can be removed
Yeah.
if at any point they become compliant and have an engineer verify the foundation meets code.
Absolutely.
Councillor Parslow?
So I'd like to move that we continue with the implementation of Section 57 on this property.
Thank you. Seconded? For a second time, do I have a seconder?
I'll second it to
Second,
discuss.
Councillor Lexstrom. Discussion? Councillor Lexstrom?
So thank you, Your Worship, and through you to administration. When I look at this, obviously a concern, I know that we hold a sum of money, a deposit, on behalf of this group. Has there been any thought of us utilizing their deposit to do the engineering work and have it done, take the money from what they have on deposit with us, negating the need for Section 57?
To your worship, Kevin?
So through your worship, the money that we hold is for development permits, so it's for specific use. I don't believe we'd have the ability to use that for this other use. It's held for the completion of that development because it was done in 2 phases, and so it would be landscaping and a few things like that that some of that money's held for.
I get, if I could carry on, Your Worship, then have they met the requirements up to the other units for the money we hold for them, or is that a delay at this point, or why do we still have those funds in our?
So in the first phase, they did meet the requirements with landscaping and finish that off. They paved their parking lot, which is in the rear. And then you have these foundations that we're speaking of today. And of course, the landscaping and whatnot has not been completed around it because it's in progress, so to speak. So that's why that's still being held.
Okay, I guess what I would be looking for, although Section 57 puts it on title, I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, somebody can come in, get a building permit, put up a structure, a basement, and then walk away from it. Can they at this point in our city? If that's all they wanted to do? Say, I want to construct a home, we dig a hole, we put a basement in, we leave it there for 10 years? Is that a legal ability of people to do that here?
So through your worship, if they were to do something like that, there's no onus on them to complete it unless they leave it in a state that would be considered a hazard or a nuisance, in which case we have powers through the community charter that enable us to rectify it so at least it's safe or it isn't a nuisance. These particular foundations, that was our first concern, was to make sure things are safe, and they did respond by putting up some fencing, ensure that nobody could get into the excavations. So that's really where our powers are. So right now they're safe. If they were never to complete them and they were become derelict, unsightly, then we'd be able to have a process through the community charter that would enable council to go in, possibly clean up the site, and then those costs would be put back on the owner if they chose not to do the work.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilbur?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just need a little bit of clarity. I'm a little confused. So we took a deposit on the development as a whole, phase 1, phase 2, and yet somehow we took that money as a deposit, but they didn't get development permits for phase 2? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, through your worship. So the development was viewed as a whole when it came to council, and so development permits, so that's why we took the security funds at that time. Then when it came to building permits, they were doing it in phases. And the second phase is the contractor built the foundations only and neglected to get the proper paperwork and permits in place.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Parslow?
The reason why I put this motion forward is it seems to me that we need to expect due diligence from builders and our staff as well, but I think the onus in this case seems to me from this correspondence with the proponents of this project, and I think there has to be some formal filing of this to protect future purchases, and there has to be some consequences for failure to engage in due diligence. I can't conceive people putting a building up, starting a building without getting the necessary paperwork done. So I don't see why we wouldn't proceed with what staff's recommending.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councillor Lexstrom?
Just to conclude, certainly I would agree with the motion that's here. I think there's issues of not getting the permits on. The work we've done to date on this and the reports that have been brought to council dealing with this issue, what's the cost to the taxpayer? Do we have any idea?
To your worship, I'll ask Kevin, but I'd make some assumptions that we've engaged with legal to fully understand our parameters on this, Kevin.
Yeah, through your worship. Initially, we had a call about the foundations and the coverings that they had them had collapsed. So we went up on site, inspected, took some pictures, got a hold of the owners. They put up the fencing. We dug into the files. That's when we become aware of this. So there's been some staff time with reports, contacting legal, things like that. I don't have an exact number, but there are a few hours that have been spent on the process.
Okay. The reason I ask that is, to me, although they have made a mistake here, they haven't obtained the proper permits to do this, I don't think the cost associated with our council having to deal with this should be on the shoulders of the taxpayers. It should come out of the funding they deposited. So I'd like you to pursue that as well, if that's possible. Tough question.
Yeah, through your worship, that's tough. I mean, the deposit, as Kevin noted, that's the on-site work, Kevin, the deposit that we have right now. So we may be limited. I mean, we can, if council wishes and would like to direct us, we can pursue avenues in which we could invoice this group for the work done to date. But we would ask for, I think Brenda was putting her hand up, would like some direction from council on that.
Okay. I know we have a motion on the floor. I would move an
Make a
amendment.
second motion?
I would move an amendment to the main motion, Your Worship, if
Sure.
I could. And I would move that administration investigate the ability to recover the costs associated with the work done on this file by the city from the proponent.
Okay. Second.
Take that as a friendly amendment, and you don't have to have a separate one, or what do you want?
Need a seconder.
No, a seconder.
Seconder? Councillor Wilbur. All right, any further discussion on the amendment? You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried? And on the main motion, I just want to, I guess, clarify one point to me on the main motion is that if what we're asking them to do is get a permit, and if they were coming into our city today to start the construction of this, these foundations to begin the construction of these residences, they would apply for a building permit. They would come in with all of the associated drawings, et cetera, that we're asking them for now. Is there anything in our request today now that puts them at an additional bit of work or expense that they normally wouldn't have had if they came in and followed the process properly from the beginning? Duncan?
So through your worship, Kevin, they may have incurred some costs in not completing the building and having to do some fencing, but other than that?
Well, and through your worship, it's going to be a little more challenging for them now to get, provide letters of assurance to the city on the foundations, because it's a lot easier to put the drawings in first, do it properly, get the inspections, and then you know your foundations are approved. Now what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to bring in a third-party engineering firm, which is going to be a cost to them, to inspect the foundations, and they're going to have to go through a process to try and verify that they were built as they should have been, and then they would provide the city with some letters of assurance to say, okay, these foundations are okay, before they can proceed to build anything on them. So there will be additional costs on them to do that work.
But they're not going to put that monkey on our back, in my view, in terms of saying, well, because we didn't get a permit, now we have to do this. That's not fair. Had they come in, we're asking them to submit a building permit, submit the engineered, registered review, providing how they can fix any deficiencies, correct any deficiencies, and provide a snap letter of compliance. And had they done the process properly from the beginning and applied the permit and applied for the building permit, they would have applied and provided their engineered drawings, and we would have done. So there's only a few things in here that aren't on us. They're on the developer who didn't follow the process of getting a building permit to begin with. Councillor Wilbur.
Within the motion, though, too, they also have the option of just removing the foundations and reclaiming the land back to what it was. So their choice for their error.
Yeah. Thank you. Further discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 6.2, we have a letter from Fallon Stoutenberg, United Way of Northern BC, requesting request of interest to deliver some YMCA mindfulness programs. Councillor Parslow.
I move that we receive this for information.
Thank you. Seconded? Councillor Earl, discussion? Councillor Wilbur?
Is this something that we could forward to, I don't know, Network Ministries or COATS or one of the groups in the community that may be able to work with YMCA to host this? I see value in it. There's lots of other programs out there that are working with our youth, and they are providing some funding. I just don't think we have the capability right now to carry this out. But is that, if we accept it for information, do we still have the ability to pass it forward to?
You can make a subsequent motion, I guess.
Okay, I will do that then.
Okay, so we have first motion to receive for information. You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. No, Councillor Wilbur?
Sure, so I'd like to move that we pass this letter of interest from Youth Mindfulness YCA onto our local user groups such as Network Ministries, Salvation Army, and COATS, which I think is Martha Funk is who you would get a hold of.
Thank you. Seconded? Councillor Earl, discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 6.3 is a request from Arlene Thorpe, Better at Home, regarding special transit service. Duncan?
So through your worship, this request came to us through BC Transit, and they sent us an email and they asked if we would like to use our 12 hours of extra time previously allocated for December in the approved budget. So this is something I wasn't aware of, but apparently there is 12 hours that can be used in December at no cost to the city, no cost to BC Transit, allocated already through the agreement. And so this use, I think, is about 3.5 hours, I think they have, or yeah, 3 hours and 15 minutes, and could fit within, would not require a grant and would just require council approval.
So the request would be that council would approve the use of 3.5 hours or 4 hours within the existing agreement we have with BC Transit of them providing 12 hours of use for community services.
Correct.
So let's give them 4 hours. No, I'm kidding. Councillor Lexter?
I would move that the City of Dawson Creek provide up to 4 hours of funding relief for BC Transit for the seniors to use the bus system for the Christmas tree light campaign,
Thank you.
or Christmas light campaign, I guess.
Thank you. Second to Councillor Parslow. Discussion? Councillor Wilbur?
I was just going to say our seniors really enjoy it, and I see they have estimated 35 riders, but usually the buses are full. And so I have done the tour the last few years, and it's really an enjoyable evening for our seniors. So.
Yeah, no, it's a great night. Thank you. That's good. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 6.4, we have a letter from Jacqueline Spurl, school liaison for family support in the Dawson Creek Secondary School, requesting for donation of bus passes. Councillor Wilbur?
Receive for information.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Parslow, discussion. Councillor Lexter?
Just a quick question through you, Your Worship, to administration. Have we done this in the past, and if so, do we limit it to one school, or do we open up? I know it's a worthy cause, but the challenges are many, I think, probably transcending just one school.
Yeah, so through your worship, I'm not aware in my time as CAO of us doing it, but maybe previously. Kevin, are you aware of any?
Okay.
Sponsorships and grants is where it would
come out of.
And so I think we've had different requests for swim passes or things like that, specifically one-offs that we consider through that grants and sponsorship fund.
Yeah.
By receiving for information, what answer would we give the applicant here? We've got it and we're considering it, or we're not considering it?
We're not considering
No
it.
action.
Okay.
No action. Further discussion? You ready for the question? All in favor? Sorry,
Oh,
did you?
I just wanted to say again, there's opportunity here through user groups. Ministry of Children and Families do have emergency funding to cover this type of stuff. So there's other avenues for them, and And that may, I guess, again, your second motion is to get back to them and ask them to look at other resources in the community because they exist.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the one piece of that to me that I was wondering about is if the school district does anything, if it's an issue of getting kids to school in the winter months, do they have an option within there to provide some passes or funding for the kids for transportation? I know transportation is a big nut for them when they're looking at transportation of kids from the rural area into the community, and I just don't know the answer to that. Councillor Parslow?
Just a comment. I'm sure there's students in every school who struggle to get to school, especially in the winter months. So whose monkey is this? That's what goes through my mind. Is it the parents, the guardians, the school district, or why should we take this one? You know what I mean? I hope I'm not coming across as too harsh. I mean, I have a great deal of empathy for some of the students and the challenges they deal with, but I would suggest that they deal with the school district. So
Good, thank you. Further discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 7 now on to reports. 7.1, we have report 18198 from the Director of Development Services regarding the commemorative plaque for 10th Street. This was a topic that we had discussed and brought forward from previous council in regards to putting some commemorative plaques on city infrastructure, and this was the 10th Street Bridge was the first one for us to have consideration. Councillor Parslow?
I'll move that report 18198 from the General Manager of Development Services re commemorative plaque for 10th Street Bridge be received. Further, that council direct staff to proceed with the purchase of the plaque in partnership with ShoreSpan for a total cost of up to $3,000.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Wilbur, discussion? Councillor Wilbur, then Councillor Parslow.
Just through you to staff, partnership, are we sharing the cost, or what does that mean?
So through your worship, I believe it was $1,500 each, Kevin? $1,500 split share.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Yes, may I ask?
Councillor, oh, sorry, Councillor Parslow, go ahead.
Oh, you won't see you. We're good.
Just this is more to new councillors. In my role as liaison to the Historical Society and Mile Zero Park Society, and this also relates a little bit to tourism, but thinking about the heritage of the community, it was pointed out to me that this community, unlike many others, doesn't seem to have too many indications when certain buildings were installed or new additions put in. Unlike, for instance, the school district, where anything new or revised, there's a commemorative plaque. Just like that very nice punk art by the art gallery, there's a nice commemorative plaque. And so I brought that forward, that we should have as a practice that we do this, and quite often that's built into the tenders that are issued, that there is a commemorative plaque. In this case, that wasn't the case, so it was a retroactive request to ShoreSpan. But I, for one, am just delighted with the 10th Street Bridge and the whole improvement that's gone on there, and I put forward that this be a start of this practice, but this should be the only time that we're sharing in the cost. If it's built into the tenders, which my understanding was the direction of council. So for $1,500, will come. The funds would presumably come out of some fund in this existing budget. So yeah. So anyway, that's why I'm putting it forward.
Thank you. It'll be a plaque that'll be welded on. We've had some issues with some of our signs going off of our park benches, and I know different things like that. So, thank you. Good. Any further?
No.
You good, everybody? All right. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 7.2, we have report 18199 from the corporate officer regarding our facility management lease agreement template. And this was another bit of work that's been brought back from administration under direction.
cleaned it up.
Councillor Parslow?
Report number 18199 from the corporate office of the facility management / agreement template be received. Further, the facility management / lease agreement template attached to this report be approved.
Thank you. Seconded? Councillor Earl, discussion? Councillor Lexstrom?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. In looking at the draft document itself, item 8, Q. Just a quick question on that. To promptly discharge any builder's liens which may be filed against the title to the premises on, okay, I don't have to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
How is it possible that if they don't own the building, somebody's putting a building lien on our city building that we're entering a lease? I don't think that's possible.
Yeah, through your worship, I would have to take a look at that. I know from my experience in some projects
Okay.
that the city owned buildings that liens were placed on, but that was during construction.
Yeah.
And so I would have to go back and look at that. Brenda, you have some info?
Yeah, through your worship, if the leaseholder was to have some work done to the building.
Yeah,
Then, and that work was not,
paid for or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
whoever did the construction could put the lien on.
Yeah, so speaking through experience, I know there's been liens on city buildings that we own that were under construction through third parties. I've experienced that.
Okay. In our draft agreement, though, it talks about any improvements have to be approved by the city
Correct.
to any of our
Yeah,
buildings.
so
So,
if one of those was not, sorry, through your.
no, that's, thanks, Brenda.
If something was done in one of our facilities without our knowledge.
But if it was with our knowledge, could we not, in granting that approval, exclude ourselves of any liability or liens being able to be placed? So a contractor would know, entering into that work, there's no ability to place a lien on this building. I don't think it would ever happen. I
Yeah.
think our groups are very good, but
Yeah, through your worship, item 15D, the city would put a notice of interest on title, and that would restrict any builder's lien being placed on title.
okay. If that prevents that, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Duncan?
So through your worship, this template came forward from council, and it was some direction from council in that there were some concerns that we had some risk because we didn't have a lot of consistency. One of the challenges in creating this template, and Brenda kind of battled with this all the way through, is we have so many different types of leases, and that's why you see all of the schedules attached, because they're all so different groups, different types. And so the idea is this is the base template, but the nuts and bolts will be contained in those schedules, and those schedules supersede this agreement. So if it's identified in a schedule, then this kind of base template is overruled, essentially, is the intent. So we needed a starting point. That's what this is.
Okay.
Thank you. Further questions? Further comments? I think it's really great for me to be a good governance, right? Put some consistency into the application of our lease and our agreements, and we have seen that where that lack of having a formal, consistent approach to our agreements, I think, starts us down a road that's going to be very positive. And as we work through them, we might find some aspects to it that we say, okay, well, now we may need to tweak them. But I think it's really good for us to begin the process of having some consistency in it. So thank you for that. Any further discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 8 bylaws, 8.1. So we have our fees and charges amendment bylaw 4398 for consideration of adoption. Duncan, this just is our addition to our cannabis.
So through your worship, this is just a text change from liquor license application to read cannabis and liquor license application.
So it's just a change, yes. Councillor Parslow, Councillor Wilbur, discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 8.2, we have report 18197 from the corporate officer regarding the Dawson Creek Park dedication amendment bylaw 4399 2018. This is our Chamberlain Park bylaw work that went on over the last year or two. Councillor Parslow.
I move that report 18197 from the corporate officer be received. Further, that Dawson Creek Park Dedication Amendment Bylaw number 4399 2018 be given first 3 readings. And further, that the alternate approval process be the option chosen to obtain the approval of the electors, including the following requirements. The deadline for receiving elector responses is 30 days following the second published notice. The elector response form attached to this report is approved, and the estimated number of eligible voters in the city of Dawson Creek is 7,620.
Thank you. Second? So it's Councillor Wilbur. Discussion. Duncan? So I'm just going to go to administration just to give, because in fairness, we've got this a bunch of work that came forward from previous council, and it was a complicated bit. Duncan?
So through your worship, there's a number of attachments with this report, including previous reports, as well as a bit of a timeline. As you can see from the timeline, it really started February 6, 2017, with an encroachment and some development down near the creek. And from there, we move forward. The original motion and direction was we were just going to remove these structures. As we moved into it, I think there were 32 or 34 different properties, and all had varying forms of encroachment, some from a portion of a deck to maybe just a basketball hoop that could be moved, and everything in between, fences and sheds and whatnot. We moved through a process over 2017 that included some public consultation with these residents, and the development of a policy. And today, the report in front of you is a result of the most recent decision from council, which was in August of 2018, which indicated and directed staff to move to an alternate approval process. So in short, if this report is approved in front of you today, we will go out to the public and ask for comments regarding removing 12 acres from behind the 34, 36 residents in Chamberlain Park, and removing that from our park dedication bylaw. Correct, Brenda? Good so far, okay. And then moving forward, if approved, and that alternate approval process moves forward, and we don't receive comment or the threshold of comment, then moving forward, that would be removed from the park dedication bylaw, and council would now have the ability to do whatever you please with that land, essentially, whether it be lease, license of occupation, sale, and we would move through that process. Is that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
This land came to the city back in the mid-70s, late 70s, I think, was a gift to the city by the developer. At the time, as it was registered as a park, there was some dispute in the land titles as to whether it was a dedicated heritage park, I think was the term, or not, or was it just a park?
Fee and simple. The land title office, sorry, through your worship, the land title office believed that the park was given to the city for exclusive park use. As we trip back through some of the minutes in the history, it was unclear, and the land title office has since removed that off of the title as council directed staff to challenge that.
So in order for us now to be able to deal with some of these aspects, we went through that sequence of activities and encroachment and da-da-da-da. And so now we have this opportunity then to begin to move forward with those properties that are affected by the encroachment and deal with them on a basis that council will provide the direction to administration on that. But as long as it was in a park and is dedicated as park, you're restricted from doing that. So that's what the purpose of this amendment bylaw is today. Does that give you the background? So any questions? So first Councillor Lekstrom, then Councillor Parslow.
Thank you, Your Worship. In speaking to this, fully understand the residents' concerns there. This is their backyards. I think many have done a great deal of work. If we proceed with this, my question would be, I'm guessing there's been a great deal of time and effort spent by the city staff on this. There's got to be cost associated with it. I would like to hear comments based on how we recover those costs, because if we're going to move forward with this, and I'm okay moving forward with it, I just don't think it should be on the shoulders of all the other taxpayers to inherit the costs of this. I think if it's 34 properties or 36, hopefully they'll come together. We'll come with a set amount of what it costs to do this for them. They can pay that and we can carry on. I would certainly think we want to pursue that.
Okay, Duncan?
So, through your worship, we had a little bit of a heads up on this question this morning. So, Brenda took a look through the fees, essentially. And so, can you talk a little bit about that, Brenda? Put her on the spot.
So right now in our fees and charges bylaw, the application fee is $500 to begin with, plus plan fees, land transfer fees, legal costs, and advertising costs. So all costs would be the property owners.
Moving forward, however, we wouldn't capture any of the previous costs, which would, if council proceeds and if we get to a point where we are formalizing these agreements, at that point, council could decide to include the previous costs as well.
Okay, no, and I understand the retroactivity isn't probably on the table, but, you know, that's something. The concern I would have is we go through a process, we get it excluded as parkland, and then the residents who have this say, no, we're not interested. Like, I think we need to get some kind of assurance that we're doing this because of an oversight, I'm thinking. People didn't realize their lot lines ended where they did, backed onto the creek. They put in infrastructure that they would like. I think that's reasonable to think it was an oversight on both sides, but I also don't want to see the city have to incur the cost to deal with this issue for 34 residents. So I guess I'm looking for some assurance that we would be able to recoup associated costs with this issue going forward. And I've heard Brenda say that we can, but we could very well go through this bylaw, remove that from park, and then I'd like to pursue with the residents, I guess, a phone call or whatever to each of say, here's what's been raised at council. Is this something you're still wanting us to pursue?
So maybe we can, as a separate direction, is quantify, if we can, in our best estimates, the amount of time and expense that the city's incurred to date to get to this point. And I'm assuming that staff time and any of the legal, any of that cost, if we can quantify that. And then as we move forward, if council directs this, that then as part of the follow-up discussions, and we have committed, we've had 2 or 3 public meetings with the residents down there, that we have our follow-up meeting, inform them of what council's direction is now, and talk about the quantification of the amount of money that the city residents now have paid in order to try to find a solution to this, right? So that would be by way of a separate motion, I think, because we've got the park or do you want that included as an amendment?
You know, I think it's just a difficult one. I could do it as a separate one. I mean, this is a removal of land out of park. I understand it, and like I said, I don't want this to be taken. I would be doing that if I lived there. I mean, they've developed this, that's fine. I just think the reasonableness of any cost incurred to do it has got to be borne by the 34 affected properties, not the entire population.
Okay. Duncan?
So, through your worship, Brenda had a comment?
Oh, just it would be cleaner if that would be a separate motion.
Okay.
Just,
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have the park dedication bylaw that we need to decide on, and then we'll quantify that. Councillor Parslow, then Councillor Wilbur.
Yeah. I have a paradigm about revenue, but I'm glad you're raising it, but I think we're moving forward appropriately. This whole issue, I think it's fair to say the initial response of council was shock, anger, that something like this has developed. This didn't come to us other than through a complaint by a resident about what was happening. After that initial shock, council resolved to work with the residents. As the mayor has stated, 3 meetings?
I think so.
At least 3, I think. Most of council were in attendance. There was a desire to get some win-win resolution to this, that we can't allow this to be swept under the carpet. We have to deal with this. And I think this, if we pass this, this empowers council with a means for coming up to some resolution. So this is a step that we need to take. Then we can deal with some other implementation issues later in a few minutes, perhaps.
Right.
So I think this is a very necessary step forward.
Thank you. Councillor Wilbur? And then
Just-
Councillor Earl?
Thank you. Just for you to staff, we removed the park dedication. We go through this process. What happens if one or two of the landowners say we don't want to purchase that land? Then where are we at?
Duncan?
So through your worship, we have no commitment at this point from the landowners to purchase. I know there was a question asked at one of the public consultations and a number of people put their hands up. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know that our recommendation at this point would be to sell it. One of the concerns is if every other person purchases the property, you end up with this property line that is jagged across the back. So at this point, kind of one step at a time, I'm not sure what that next step is, and we'll apply the policy as we review each property.
Okay, so just a follow-up, then we remove park dedication. Let's say we don't sell the property. Does it just then become green space within the city? Like,
So through your worship, the park dedication is removed, but it can still be zoned park, correct?
okay, and I just have one
Yep.
other. So, and through you, your worship, to staff again. So this is kind of like the flagship issue on encroachment and trespass. We know there's many other areas in the city that have the same problems, whether it be walkways or paths or whatever, road allowances. Would this then, moving forward and putting this in place, will that then set us that foundational baseline moving forward for other properties that are going to come forward? Because they are going to come forward.
Duncan?
I think you're always going to have members of the public look at precedent. I mean, it is going to be a decision of council always. We're always going to try and recommend continuity and consistency. And if you recall, as we move through this process, council directed that we take a little more proactive approach on the current encroachments that are in development and trying to work with our parks crews to identify those areas. So I've spoken with most of our outdoor crews and most of our indoor crews about just taking that proactive approach and identifying a fence or any of these other areas so that we can engage with these while they're under construction and not 20 years later like we are in this circumstance. So there has been some changes, but our policy is still reactive at this point. So those encroachments, unless we receive complaints that have been there for a number of years, we're not taking those on at this time.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted it out there for clarity. Thank you.
Councillor Earl?
Thank you, Worship, and through you to staff. With respect to the property taxes paid by these 34 properties, residents, do we know from Assessment BC whether those properties are being taxed based on what their yards actually are or what they think their yards are, or is that not something we're privy to?
And through your worship, I would ask Flavia if she has any knowledge. I would assume that it's actual.
Yes, it's based on actual. That would not consider if it is not part of the measure that BC assessment has.
BC assessment would do the valuation on the legal title
Exactly.
of the property and not based on how much is being used by the property owner in the event they've extended their use into public space. Perfect. Any further questions? Any further comments? You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Lexstrom?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I would move that the city pursue cost recovery based on the cost to initiate the removal of park zoning and commit to working with the residents to, whether it be a lease, a sale, but it has to be full cost recovery. And I haven't had a chance to write the motion up yet, but I'm going to work with you on that. But it would be that this does not cost the taxpayers dollars, but rather in recognizing the, I guess, benefit to the homeowners, they would incur any cost associated with this.
Thank you. Second,
second that.
Councillor Wilbur. Discussion. Councillor Parslow?
I recognize the impromptu nature of this motion. I agree with the essence of it, for sure. my thoughts about this, just for the record, were that I got the impression that there would be a number of sales possible here of some land. That revenue would go into the kitty. There may be some lease arrangements. That revenue would go into the kitty. Also, with any land sales, the assessed value of the property would increase, which would generate more property tax. So all those factors, I thought, were positive revenue streams that might assuage or be applied to the city's costs. So, but I don't know the mix of all that, and maybe did you have similar thoughts? Or?
Well, so for me, it'll be the degree of development that on the encroachment into the park space off of the residents' property will determine, I think, whether it's cost effective for them to enter into an agreement to purchase it and pay those costs, or to simply move the encroachment. And I think that'll be, each one of them are going to be individual in nature, because we did have some, as was indicated by Duncan, you've got some permanency of some structures, you've got some significant investments and some landscaping components, and then you've got some that were a fence that was built that was not proper to the fence line, property line and things. So I think it'll be the degree of encroachment will determine whether there's value for the homeowner to remove the encroachment or just adhere to it, or say, no, I want to absolutely purchase that property and then pay the associated cost. Councillor Earl?
Thank you, Worship. So with respect to the cost recovery component, I think the crux of the issue for me is as Duncan was saying, reactive versus proactive. If we were proactively removing the parkland dedication and then, selling it to developers or people who are going to development, I think it would be one thing to expect to absorb some costs in doing that. But we've been compelled by circumstance to seek out this resolution. So I don't think, given that our hands kind of being forced on dealing with the issue, that it's reasonable to expect that we're going to be able to recover the cost for the taxpayer, because this isn't something that we chose to do as part of a political platform. It's something we're doing because circumstances have led us here. So,
thank you. Further discussion? Further conversation? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Item 9, Mayor's Business. So I want to give an update on, I was in Calgary not last week, the week before. Purpose of the trip was 2 or 3-fold, and I want to give a little bit of an overview of it. I want to start with Source Energy Services, and that might be a little bit off of how it's outlined on the agenda. Source Energy Services are a frac sand company that provide frac sand for the industry operating in northeastern British Columbia and western in Alberta, and so the transition of how the industry works today is these guys now provide the sand directly to the companies, rather than in some cases how the completions companies would have done it, like Canyon or Trican or Sandgel. And so we've heard, and I've certainly heard it, and I'm sure council have, about the concerns about the big trucks parking along the access road and down around in behind A&W and out in behind the hotels towards the Encana Event Center. And so these trucks work and haul the sand for the companies. And so my reason for meeting with Source Energy is they're one of the major providers of this service, and they hire and contract out the trucking companies to haul the sand, like Houston or Venom or those companies. And so what I'm looking to do is to try to see if we can find a way to work with them to find a solution without having some developer come in and develop a truck stop for these vehicles, to get them off of that access road and plugging up our access road for the businesses down there, as well as creating the intensity of parking in that area by those big units. These guys, when they work, they have to be off, they're required to work a certain period of time, and then they have to park for a certain period of time as well. That's required by the Commercial Vehicle Safety Enforcement Branch. And So if they're not looking to park there specifically, they're looking to get off the road for 8 hours, they're looking to have a bite to eat and have their sleep or whatever while they're off. And so we've talked about, and I met with them and had that conversation about them, about trying to facilitate a location for them to be able to get off of parking there. So they get in there, have a bite to eat at the restaurants that are located down around there, and then go find a place where they can park for that 8 or 10 hours. One of the areas that I've talked to administration about that I really think would be an option, an opportunity, is down east of the Encana Event Center. And so in that large area where we see in the summertime the trailer folks, the RVers park for the exhibition and rodeo, there's a large area in there that's utilized for RV parking. It is city-owned property. It's part of the Encana Event Center. And so my thought was, is if we could develop that into a graveled area, a parking area, it would be beneficial to the rodeo and the fair in the summertime when they're having their fair, because the RVers park there. And the rest of the year, we could use it as a parking area for these big trucks to get them off of wherever they're parking today. Talked to one of the map providers, because when I did the initial costing of this, to excavate that area, 6 or 8 inches of dirt, remove the dirt, and then fill it with aggregate, it's a big cost, and it's certainly not one that I'm looking for us to have our residents and our businesses pay for to provide an option. But anyway, so I met with them, and they're very interested in working with us to find a solution and an option. And we're doing a little bit of preliminary work on it, and once we get some of that back, we'll bring it back into council to give you guys the feedback into it, and then explore what some of those options may be, and then get the direction of council to whether this is an option or not. But right now I'm just kind of scoping out some of that initial work on it, because I think we need to find an option. We could say get them out of there, we can ban the parking, but I think we want to try and find a solution, to me, and that's what I'm working towards. Does anybody have any comments or questions about it at all, about that? Like I say, with more information today, I just wanted to give you guys an update on what I was up to there. So we had a meeting with, also when I was down we met with the Hockey Canada, we met with Tom Rennie. Further, and Barry and Ryan Duncan were there as well, because of some other stuff going on with the Hockey Canada partnership and agreement. But we had some further discussion with them about the 5-year agreement we have with them, further developing some of those opportunities within that agreement, and developing those opportunities within Hockey Canada for the next 4 or 5 years for us. It was very positive to have an hour in the Hockey Canada head offices and meeting with both Tom Rennie as the CEO, as well as some of the other senior executive members there in Hockey Canada, and strengthening that opportunity that exists for us and leveraging that agreement we have with Hockey Canada. So, I met with Brad Harold, the Vice President of Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. When I got home from the LNG Canada announcement, I was called to a meeting. I had a meeting scheduled that night at the Dawson Creek Hospital. It was with an organization called the local physicians, with an organization called the Canadian Association of Physicians concerned with the environment. And this was a really focused discussion about what this organization feel are the health hazards associated with the industry and the fracking industry that exists in the natural gas sector in our region. I spent an hour and a half in that meeting, or 2 hours that night, with the physicians and the organization, and I'm the least qualified person to talk about the technical aspects of the oil and gas sector, but I do know a little bit about it, and so some of the comments around that were made, I think, deserve to have the expertise and the technical aspects of the industry delivered to people who have an interest in it, and our local physicians are one of those groups who have an interest in it. And so I met with Brad Harold, as the Vice President of Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, to talk about that and say, look, I need your guys' help, we need your help to be able to bring that aspect to the development of the industry, and if there is a health component to it, let's get the folks that have some technical aspect, some technical expertise, some technical knowledge and understanding of it, to give that complete story of it for our community, because our residents hear that, are concerned about it, and we should have the support of industry to be able to bring that forward. So I spent an hour or so with Brad talking about that, and we've certainly got some options available that they're going to bring forward, and he made some suggestions as well. So anyway, it was very good. Paul Murphy, the Vice President of Pembina, I spent an hour with Paul, and continuing to just understand and develop that understanding of the development of the midstream processing aspect that Pembina have. And Pembina now have bought Verizon, which are a large now partner within Canada doing the midstream processing here. And so I always want to make sure I stay in touch with Paul Murphy as the VP of Pembina in regards to the development activities they have planned for our region and our area, both in terms of facilities, operations, and construction of other projects that are going on. I met with the senior team and community relations team from TransCanada, and same thing, they've got a number of projects going on. Wanted to talk about the Coastal GasLink project because that'll be kickoff in Groundbirch, and is kicking off in Groundbirch, and TransCanada, Mr. Rick Gateman is the president of Coastal GasLink for TransCanada, and so I had a meeting with Rick and his team about it, and just want to make sure we stay engaged, and they'll plan to be here in January sometime to do a presentation and an update to Council on the Coastal GasLink project, along with all the other associated work they have going on in our region and in our community. I met with Mike Forgo, I don't know if Mike's a VP or Senior Director of Operations for Encana for our region, and spent about an hour with Mike talking about a whole host of topics with Encana and their development, the activities that are going on here. We've seen some of the impacts from that, both from the operations as well as construction. I wanted to talk about the water and the water use with our reclaimed water with Encana, and further developing any opportunities that might exist with the industry and leveraging that reclaimed water facility and reclaimed water use. I think it's a big time aspect to our community to be leveraging that reclaimed water for industry as a whole, and Canada have purchased some in the past, and so wanted to have some further conversation with him about that. And then I also met with Terry Anderson, the Chief Operating Officer of ARC Resources, and ARC are another large upstream company in our region and operating in the community, and wanted to spend some time with Terry just talking about same thing about development, local hire, securing and supporting our local business. Wanted to talk about the reclaimed water with him, as well as they've got some construction projects going on in the plan near years. So it was just an opportunity to connect with the industry guys. So I spent about 2.5 days in Calgary, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and tried to make the best use of that time while we're there. And I had another meeting with Chris Roush, the Director of Operations for Verizon, for breakfast, but he ended up with the flu and canceled on the last minute. So that's my Calgary update, and I wanted to give an update on that. Councillor Parslow?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Busy time. Brad Harold, as you know, health concerns are pretty high up in everyone's mind. So what do you see flowing from that meeting? Because there's so many issues related to that I think we have a role in advocating for best quality health environment we can have for our citizens.
I absolutely, completely agree, and I think that's, for me, our role in terms of trying to facilitate the access to the expertise that exists within the industry or educational organizations who have done research, or anywhere we can help get some information that would help provide some feedback back into our community. And like I say, I used that physicians meeting that night. So Brad gave me a couple of notes in terms of some area of access of some information they've done and some work. they're doing some work right now on methane emissions with using this, and it's not them so much as Geoscience BC and I think ResourceWorks, and they're using some drone technology to access and do some work around methane emissions that's really leading edge. They also talked about, and I'm going to follow this up with them, is UNBC, because sometimes they have their graduate students looking for research projects, and so if we have some specific topics that we think would be worthwhile for that to take on, so I'm going to explore that with UNBC and with Northern Lights College to maybe see if we can find some aspects of that. So he gave me some really good feedback, and I'm just kind of putting that together, and but he also gave me some access to some research material and work that they have spent on air, water, and environmental concerns that I think would be helpful for us to help facilitate back into our community.
One of the things I attended on behalf of the city was the Real Estate Institute meeting here. And this whole question was one of the major topics brought up at that meeting. And there may be an appropriate time in the future whereby the city might want to host a public forum on all this, because what I gathered at that meeting, there's an awful lot of people in specific areas who feel voiceless, and I know that is in regional district area, but we are part of the general community. So I appreciate that you brought it up, and that I just think we need to monitor it, and there might be an opportunity, because this is, I sense the anxiety level is increasing in the region about our quality of life vis-a-vis health.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I say, absolutely, I was really struck that night by the concerns that were raised, and for me, I take it that that's a role we can play and help facilitate access to information for community groups and residents. You know, I'll use the example, the Farmington residents have been really concerned with the level and intensity of activity out there over the last year since they built those facilities and the intensity of development. And so the Ministry of Natural Gas, and we led that meeting down in Victoria in about March or April, when we started to hear that, and we led it with the mayors of Pouskoupi, Tumbler Ridge, Chetwynd, our rural areas. We met with the Minister of Natural Gas about that topic, about the concerns our residents were feeling in the rural area, concerned with the development. From there, we've seen the development of now a structure that's been put together by the Ministry of Natural Gas, led by the Deputy Minister, Dave Nicolishan, and Paul Jeekins, the chair of the BC Oil and Gas Commission. They put an oversight committee in place today, so that and they've got a firm structure now they're working on developing for community groups, supported by the BC Oil and Gas Commission. And the intent of that is to be able to feed that social components, the social impacts of development in the region, back up to the Deputy Minister, who's absolutely co-chairing this meeting with Brad Sperling, the chair of the Peace River Regional District, because of exactly that. For people in the residents and the concerns they feel in the development in their area and around their home and affecting their quality of life, to be able to feed that up, because there is a component to that, and I think that's a demonstration how significant it is when the Deputy Minister is absolutely going to co-chair that with our chair of the Peace River Regional District. But again, I think it's incumbent upon us, and I'm going to continue to work on it, to find ways that we can help facilitate that message for our residents and our community. Blair?
And thank you, Your Worship, for that. Just a question, obviously, for those of us that are just coming to this table recently. Is there an issue right now that's right, and I say this with due respect, it hasn't been brought to my attention, is it an air quality issue people are concerned about? Is it the flaring issue? Is it the light pollution? Or is it a combination of everything we're talking about and trying to, because I mean, I'm a huge supporter of industry, but not at any cost. I've always said that. I think our resource sector is the lifeblood of our ability to deliver a quality of life here. But I'm just not sure what we're focused on, because at one point the Oil and Gas Commission did do air monitoring upon request for the region. Is it an air issue, or is it an overall?
Yeah, I think I heard a number of different components. People are concerned about the emissions and the air quality. They're concerned about the water and is it impacting water. And I think it's an overall, if I use the term, it's the environmental aspects of the development of the industry and how it's impacting or potentially impacting the health of the residents in our community and our region. And that's kind of the themes that you've heard. And so I know, and so that's part of it for me. I want to get some of that air quality monitoring information and data that's been done by industry and have somebody come and present that into our community. And some of the groundwater, and I know that the regional district, so Geoscience BC and Resource Works, all of these organizations that are organizations doing exactly some of that work. I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to engage with them and through the Peace River Regional District to ensure that we try to bring the aspect of the industry, so we're not just hearing it from one source, but bring a balance to it, and as well bring some technical expertise to it and information that people can feel that they trust and that is transparent, and that they can hear that if there is an issue, what is being done about it, or if there isn't an issue, how can you demonstrate that? And that's, I'm just plowing water right now with CAP and industry to try to start to facilitate that for our community.
All right, thank you.
Good. Any other questions? Calgary, 3 days, it was good. The annual Christmas tree light up was held a week ago. Was it a week ago Friday? Yeah. And so first of all, it was an amazing tree again. Thank you to the McPhail family, who I understand donated the tree, and the South Peace Oilmen's Association, who put it on, and all those folks that donate time, equipment, labor, and manpower to get the tree installed downtown. Another amazing event. I think this year was as big a crowd as I've seen down there. It was crazy. People having a really fun family night in downtown Dawson Creek, and I really appreciate the opportunity, one, for the Oilmans who invite us in and put that event on that night, and for the staff who give us the candy canes to be able to hand out. It was
1,200.
pretty cool. And
1,200 candy canes.
and to everyone who participated and everyone who was there, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun, and it's a really iconic event for our community. It's turning into that Friday night. Weather was perfect. Saturday morning, a week ago Saturday after the tree light up, I've been invited annually to the Ron Pettigrew School annual gingerbread competition, and they have about 6 different categories, and they have amazing work that they put on. And so the judging of the gingerbread competition is one event I look forward to every year, and I really appreciate the work that the kids, the students, the families go through building gingerbread.
It's not a tasting event, is it?
No, and it's kind of the downside of the event, but I'm going to make a suggestion next year for the judges.
Samples?
It's a great event for a Saturday morning. Attended the crime prevention dinner last Saturday, a week ago Saturday night at the Calvin Kirk Performing Arts Center, and Rural Crime Watch, the Citizens on Patrol, Crime Watch, is it the organization you report your crime to?
The RCMP?
Thank you. Where you
Crime Stoppers?
Crime Stoppers.
Crime Stoppers.
So that's the crime prevention dinner, and so those organizations are there with. It's a night for their volunteers, and they have a potluck dinner. Anybody that's interested in going to an amazing potluck dinner, it's a great night. Anyway, thank you to all the volunteers and all of the organizations who help volunteer their time and energy and effort to crime prevention in our community and our region. It was really, really good, and I really appreciate the fact that they invite Laverne and I and give us the opportunity to come and say thank you. And Emily Bernier and I were there, and we're going to volunteer, absolutely. I am, and I know Mike has indicated the same, to get on that Citizens on Patrol Society and get volunteering some time to our community. Council held their strategic planning, first of the strategic planning exercises on Thursday. Really got into some great discussion for a day on the financial, primarily the financial fiscal planning for the future, and it was a really good day, a really good discussion, and I'm looking forward to the coming months with Council in terms of getting to work on the budgeting process and the fiscal future of our community. And 9.2, we have the planning underway now for the April trade show, the Home and Garden Leisure Show, I think it is. And the 2019 show is being planned. We're starting to put our booth thoughts together. And last year we used the airport as a theme for the city, and so we got asked if we had any ideas of themes, and I wondered if this event, sport tourism, might be a theme for us. We could use the Hockey Canada partnership as a kind of a piece of that we're working away on some of the events. We just hosted the women's national team, and so I wanted to bring that back to council to get your thoughts, and if anybody has any thoughts on the theme that we would use for our Home and Garden Leisure Show booth this spring. Councillor Wilbur.
I like event tourism. I would just like to ask that, again, Love Dawson Creek could have a small corner of our booth to promote shopping local.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on our theme for that? You like the idea of the event sport tourism? And maybe we engage Hockey Canada. Maybe they could bring some folks up to us and help. Maybe we bring up Jerome McGinley or something like that. Wears Calgary Flames jersey. Councillor Earl.
Hi, thank you, Your Worship. With respect to, I think sport tourism is a great subject. I'd like to make sure, to the extent that we have it at the booth available, we're able to take that piece about sport tourism and kind of engage in the larger conversation about how that impacts economic development. I know we've got some figures from previous hockey tournaments about the amount of commercial activity it brought into the community and how it benefited our hoteliers and our restaurateurs and whatnot. And I want to make sure that if we're doing that as part of a booth, we have that information available to us as councillors so we can relay it to the public who maybe sport tourism isn't their thing, but as a taxpayer, they can see there's some benefit to the community.
Absolutely. I think we can build that kind of detail around what we want to provide and how we want to provide it and the material we want to support in it. Like I say, it was just come last week, and so I wanted to kind of get it back here, and that was the one I kind of jumped to me was this event sport tourism aspect to it. Okay, so we'll move forward with that, and that'll be the theme. Do we need a motion? Do you want a motion from that, or is it just?
I don't feel we need a motion.
Okay.
Are you sure? No, I'm just kidding.
Just brainstorming.
Could get that. That never happens.
Got love in there. I'm good.
No additional budget.
That's it for me under Mayor's business. Anybody have any other questions or comments? Thank you. Diary?
I guess the only update, Your Worship, is we have Urban Systems here today to talk about zoning and the process moving forward, which will hopefully address some of the items identified under the follow-up list under the Residential Development Committee.
Good, thank you. Consent calendar? Councillor Parslow, seconded.
Sure.
Councillor Wilbur, all in favor? Opposed, carried, thank you. Strategic priorities?
So through Your Worship, the only update, we met on Thursday, as you mentioned. Staff has some work that we will be bringing back through council here in the near future.
Thank you. Media? Austin? Thank you. Motion to recess, and we'll have reconvene in about 12 minutes for urban system.
All right, so moved.
Sure.
To order, and back into now our delegations 2.2, and we have urban systems are here this morning to give us an update on our zoning bylaw, and so Katrin and Emma, nice. Welcome. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Aaron is our city planner. I don't know that council has actually
Oh.
had an opportunity to meet Aaron yet. So Aaron's just going to do a quick introduction for council on urban systems.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, I haven't used this mic before. Good morning. To the councilors I haven't met before, good morning and welcome. This morning we're going to be going over the a zoning bylaw 101 with urban systems. So we have Katrin and Emma here from the Fort St. John Office of Urban Systems. They'll be leading this presentation and this is kind of our first step with council as we work through our new zoning bylaw project, which we'll be working through the next few months, engaging with both the public, council, and staff to come up with a new zoning bylaw. So, without any further ado, turn it over.
Now try and read your stuff.
Did you need another leg on?
No. Good morning, and thank you for having us today. My name is Katrin Saxty. I am a planner with Urban Systems up in Fort St. John. I've been with Urban for over 17 years, 14 of them in the Peace Country, so I'm pretty familiar with Dawson Creek and the Peace Country in general. I've had the privilege to work with you guys on a number of initiatives over the last several years, the most recent being your official community plan update, the OCP, which was adopted in August of this year, so that was great. With me is Emma Greendale. She's an engineer in training and a junior planner, and she has also been working with the City of Dawson Creek on a number of projects and will be working closely on the zoning bylaw update. So we realized that we have an hour for this presentation, so I worked hard to trim it down and trim it down some more. And for those of you that know me, and I do know many faces around the room, but not all, I do talk fast, so we should be fine. I'd like to be able to get through the presentation, and then we can open it up for questions at the end, if that works. Does that sound okay with everyone? Wonderful. Okay. So, we've got a few things to cover off today. Let me see. Yes, excellent. So the first one is, what is a zoning bylaw? We're going to talk just at a high level about the review process that we are undertaking that came out of the request for proposals for this project. We're going to just highlight the relationship between official community plans, which are high-level policy documents, and zoning bylaws, which are regulatory documents that are based in the present. We're going to discuss some benefits of zoning, permitted uses, density, how we make changes to zoning, the unintended implications and consequences of sometimes of changes that have been made, and then the next steps in our process. All right, so a zoning bylaw, as I mentioned, it's a regulatory document. It controls the use of land within a local government. So local governments are legislated under the Local Government Act to do this. A zoning bylaw divides land into zones, and it sets out the regulations for what can happen in each of those zones. Some of the regulations might be quite similar between zones. Some of them will be very different. A zoning bylaw also sets out the rules that property owners need to follow with regards to what are they allowed to do on their property, where can they put their buildings, their sheds, their garages, etc. What's the minimum parcel size for new subdivisions, new parcels. A zoning bylaw will also provide regulations with respect to things such as bed and breakfasts, home-based businesses, parking, shipping containers, suites. There's a lot of regulations that a zoning bylaw lays out. And I know one of the most important things that I always say is we always encourage people, don't just look at the zone that you fall within when you read a zoning bylaw. You actually have to look at the whole document in its entirety, because different sections will still impact what you can do on your property. So if you live in a single-family zone, for example, you cannot just look at that one page and think that tells you everything you need to know about what you can and cannot do on your property. So the zoning bylaw, as I mentioned, it is legislated by the Local Government Act, which also talks about a variety of other things, but it's Part 14 that really talks about powers and procedures for community development, in which there are regulations specific to zoning. Part 14 also talks about public hearings, adoption procedures, and a variety of other land use regulations. And so this is the one that this is what guides the zoning bylaw. It's also the section that guides the official community plan, which you recently went through, and what has to be within these documents, and what kinds of things you know, are good to have, but maybe not required. With the zoning, it's pretty clear, these are the things you have to do. It's a black and white document. That's the intent of a zoning bylaw.
Awesome. So there's a number of things that the city can and can't regulate in the zoning bylaw. So things the city does have control over are uses within each zone, the density of the zone, parcel sizing, and like Katrin mentioned, what types of buildings can be on that parcel. You can talk about, you can regulate parking, including off-street parking and loading, design standards, anything to do with affordable housing and special needs housing, runoff control and stormwater management, signage, screening and landscaping, and percentage of habitable suites, which comes in play in secondary suites. And in the spring of this year, the province of BC also enabled local governments to be able to regulate multi-family residential rental properties through zoning by location, by a specific number or a portion or percentage of units within the building. Things you guys can't control are more specific aesthetics. So things like the exterior design of buildings, what materials people use on their driveways, the color of buildings, building schemes, or landscaping specifics. You can provide developers with a list of local foliage and trees that'll grow well in the climate. You can actually dictate to people how many they need to put down.
Or what kind.
Or what kind. So within the zoning bylaw, these are the different sections within it. So there's permitted and accessory uses, lot sizes, maximum building heights and setbacks from the road, unit densities, maximum lot coverage, again, parking, and regulations around bed and breakfasts, home occupations, and most recently cannabis. The Local Government Act, it may also by bylaw regulate off-street parking, runoff stormwater management and control, which I said earlier, and it's landscaping. So for our zoning bylaw review process, we have a few different engagement opportunities. So with the public and the development communities, we've structured these Good Neighbor workshops. So there's 2 rounds for each, both the public and the development community, so 4 in general. And then with staff and council, we have 6 upcoming staff workshops and 5 upcoming council workshops. And so we'll talk about these later and when they specifically fall into our review process. But the city issued the RFP for us to do this work for the new bylaw to be updated in terms of modernization, in terms of being more visually appealing, so having lots of graphics to illustrate concepts. Easy for the city to administer, and implements the new community plan, which was, as Katrin said, adopted in August. So we are on phase 1 of 4 for the bylaw review process. So right now we're in our issues identification stage. And we're hoping that the Good Neighbor workshops within this will be done at the end of January. Next up, phase 2 is a technical review. So we're looking for that to be done early spring 2019. Phase 3 is our bylaw preparation, and so we're targeting for that phase to be done in March or April of 2019. And then phase 4 is the approval of the bylaw, which, dependent on council schedules and what happens with the Good Neighbor workshops, it'll follow suit. So just like the OCP process, we have workshops with council scheduled throughout the process, throughout the phases, just to keep everyone up to date and in the loop on what's going on in the project. So as Katrin said, zoning bylaws are related to official community plans. So an OCP is a future-oriented policy document. The OCP that was just approved in August was set for the timeline of 2036. And then a zoning bylaw is a present regulatory document. So anything that's relevant right now. So the intent is for the zoning or the OCP to be implemented over time. And so the idea is that over time, the zoning bylaw and the OCP start to reflect each other more and more. And so they both can be amended occasionally, and they don't have to be done all at once. An instance of that, especially recently, was the work that the city has done with cannabis. And so things that have been passed down from provincial and federal governments over time can be implemented as they occur. Okay, so the zoning identifies present parameters of a parcel, and the OCP identifies future division of the parcel, so they might not match all the time. So an instance of that might be that the OCP designates a parcel as future multifamily, but currently the house that's on there right now is a single-family detached house. And so the idea is that if the owner of the single-family detached house were to be applying for rezoning, you would want them to be moving towards the direction of multifamily and not, say, commercial or industrial. We want to move towards the uses that are outlined in the OCP. So council is accountable for implementing the OCP and making sure that the direction is following what is outlined. So some of the benefits of zoning are separating conflicting land use and, again, implementing the OCP. So that's making sure things like residential lots aren't beside industrial lots and that there's buffer zones between conflicting land uses. It's ensuring a degree of certainty for property owners and potential purchasers of the land, so property owners know what's expected of them on their parcels. Again, requiring land developments to meet certain bylaws, such as parking. Providing residents an opportunity to get involved in community land use decisions, especially now at the engagement level, and can be enforced in the event of non-compliance, and just helps prevent unsightliness in properties.
So one of the main elements of a zoning bylaw is found in each of the zones that's identified, and that is the list of permitted uses. In many zoning bylaws, you'll have permitted uses and accessory uses. I believe in Dawson Creek's case, it's just a long list of here's what you can do on your land. Permitted uses really identify what you're allowed to do on your property within each zone. There's different ways of looking at it. I've had conversations with various clients in the past about stacked zoning versus unstacked zoning. And so stacked zoning is really one of those things where you allow a wide range of uses within a zone. And an example in Dawson Creek is your multifamily zones. In those zones, you can have everything from a single family home to a multifamily development. So very much a stacked zone where any of those uses are permitted. And there's nothing wrong with it. It provides for a lot of flexibility, but it also kind of blurs the line when you sit there and you think about what is the intent of a multifamily zone. Is it to have single-family homes, or is it more to enable and encourage multifamily development because this is where you want it? So there's pros and cons. So the stacked zoning does provide more flexibility. It makes it easier for property owners to do things with their land. They don't have to come to the city quite so often. Whereas if you have very specific kind of focused zones, if somebody wants to do something different, of course they'd be coming to you for a rezoning application. Permitted accessory uses. So often we see zoning bylaws really parcel those out. What are the uses you can flat outright do on the zone? Those are the permitted uses. Accessory uses are those kinds of things that you can do this as long as you've got one of the permitted uses. And a great example of this is a bed and breakfast or a garage. You don't want to have just a garage on a residential property. It should be in conjunction with the home. So it can either be built at the same time or come in afterwards. Same thing with like a shed or a greenhouse. Those are often seen as accessory to the permitted or the principal use of the zone. So we can often parcel some of those things out to help provide some more direction, because we've seen examples in the past where you've got a property owner who owns two parcels, one's vacant and one's just got a garage on it, and that's it. So trying to eliminate those kinds of less efficient uses of the land. We also want to balance between being really, really specific and really, really broad. So what I mean by this in the realm of permitted uses is we can have our permitted uses be so specific that there is absolutely no gray. And so if it is, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head here. Convenience store is just a convenience store. There's no other sort of area. Whereas if you use language like retail store, it makes it a bit broader. So there's pros and cons to both. Again, when you make it a little bit grayer, you introduce flexibility, but then sometimes you also inadvertently introduce loopholes, and everybody will evaluate things differently. So there is benefits to being very specific, but then it becomes challenging when a permitted use comes up and it's not on your very long specific list. What do you do with it then? Where does it fit? So these are all things that we will be working through as we go through the zoning bylaw, just to make sure that the terms for your permitted uses are are modern, are hopefully flexible enough, but still specific enough to really balance that. Because we've seen zoning bylaws where the list of permitted uses is 3 pages of a bulleted list, and it's everything under the sun, except for the one thing that you want to do. We also need to balance, again, the flexibility versus control. So this really comes back to how involved does the city of Dawson Creek want to be when a property owner wants to do something? If it's not listed, do you want them to come to you? Do you want to make the environment for developing a little bit more flexible? Do you want to have, sort of the ultimate control? That's really a question for council to consider as we move forward. There's many activities that can occur, and there's absolutely no problems with them, provided it's set up well. And then there's others where you might want some control. So we need to be really careful with the language that is chosen for listing the permitted uses within the zoning bylaw. And then again, the last point, and I've already alluded to this, is really giving some thought as to what is the intent or the purpose of each zone. Do we have multiple zones that are almost the same thing? Then I would ask, why do we have multiple zones that are almost the same thing? Can we collapse it into one? Do we need them both? And so really, what is the overall intent? The more zones you have, the more administrative work there is to implement the zoning bylaw. The fewer zones you have, obviously the easier it is, but again, you lose some of that control. One of the things that the zoning bylaw does is really helps direct and articulate the density that is desired within a zone. The density is the amount or scale of development that is permitted on a site. For residential zones, it's usually articulated in units per hectare. And so that is, as you can see, the number of units that are permitted on a hectare of land. It's pretty straight, easy division. Your OCP already sets densities in it, and the zoning bylaw will just reiterate those more specifically within each of the zones. From a commercial perspective, you can use floor space ratio, which is the total floor area to the area of the parcel. And it's also known as floor area ratio, so the terms are used interchangeably. There are opportunities, particularly with residential density, to increase the density. There's tools, set out in the Local Government Act, and this is particularly with regards to multifamily density. So you might have a developer come in and say, hey, I really want to build this big apartment building or what have you, and it's a higher density than what you've articulated is permitted. You as the local government can allow that, provided they contribute certain things in return for that increased density. And these things are community amenity contributions, so whether it's increased park space or bus shelters or additional recreational space within the multifamily development, there's various mechanisms to do that, and you just need to set out some of this language in the zoning bylaw if that is something that is, of interest for Dawson Creek. It's often negotiated between the local government and the developer once they get to that stage in the process. So making changes to zoning, as Emma mentioned, we do amend zoning bylaws. We generally amend them, I would say, more than OCPs. We don't want to amend official community plans too often. The idea is that you've thought out your long-term vision for the community, and it does get amended when there's major shifts in sort of the direction of the community. Zoning gets amended more often because you've got people wanting to do different things with their land, and that's totally fine, provided it is consistent with the direction set out in the official community plan. Some zoning amendments are initiated by the city itself. So for example, through this process, we may look at, are there properties that actually should be zoned something differently? And we would highlight that as part of this process. The majority of zoning amendments are initiated by the property owner. They can rezone completely to a different zone, provided they go through the full public process. They can request amendments to certain requirements within their zone. So for example, if they have a setback and they actually can't meet it or don't want to meet it, or if there's a height requirement and they want their building is maybe a bit taller, they can come and request those kinds of variances. Or there is the option to create a new zone. It's probably my least favorite option, but it exists. So when it just doesn't fit within the framework of your zoning bylaw, you can develop a new zone. All of these methods require a very thorough public process, and it's really important, particularly to the residents or the properties around the property that's requesting a change in zoning. And some of these can be dealt with quite simply, and some of them will require some head scratching and figuring out what is the best course of action, and making sure that it is still in the best interest of the community. I think that's always a common theme between zoning amendments and official community plan amendments is this benefiting the community as a whole? So one of the things that we just wanted to highlight is that through zoning, oftentimes there's conversation about, oh, we'll just add that permitted use, or we'll just reduce this setback, or we'll just do a little change. And we've seen it many times where there's unintended implications and consequences. So, and sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative, and hopefully most of them are positive. So we really wanted to just stress that any decisions as we go through this process for change to the zoning needs to be really thought out and considered prior to being implemented. Some examples that I just want to highlight here is, if you reduce the front yard setback, if you reduce it too much, do you still have space for a vehicle to be parked on your property, or is the back half of the vehicle hanging out over the sidewalk or the street? We've seen it happen. We want to add some suites in zones. Okay, which zones? All of them? Some of them? It has unintended consequences. Adding a permitted use. We always say, are you absolutely sure that any property with this zoning, you'd be okay having this use in? Because when you add a permitted use to your list of permitted uses, you're basically saying that. So if we're going to add a vet clinic, let's just say, to let's say like a highway commercial zone. Bad example, but it's what I came up with right now. Are you okay with a vet clinic setting up shop anywhere you have a highway commercial zone? So really thinking through about how we're adding or taking away permitted uses, because that's the kind of implications that sometimes we don't recognize it, because you're dealing with one property that just wants to do this here, so we're going to add it, and then it can have potential implications for all properties that are zoned the same. We also, as I mentioned, balancing having too few zones versus too many. We've talked about that already. And just really being clear on what's the purpose of the zones, what do we want them to do. I think we got some really great direction from the community and from council throughout the OCP process. And so carrying that through into the zoning bylaw, and I'm sure we will hear lots in our Good Neighbor workshops in January in terms of what the public would like to see. The zoning bylaw is the document that the public is responsible for making sure that they build and develop and use their property within the regulations outlined within it. So this is the document they're really interested in, because it's the one that tells them what they can and can't do on their property. And people are very sensitive about that.
Perfect. So the next immediate steps in terms of the updates will be the Good Neighbor workshops with the community and the developers. And so there'll actually be one Good Neighbor workshop with council as well too. Then secondly, preparing the issues identifications and the direction summary report. And so there'll be one workshop with council going over the key issues that we've addressed. Third will be the issues and opportunities workshop, and then again there'll be two this time with council. So there'll be one going over the first draft of the zoning bylaw, and the second will be the second Good Neighbor workshop. And last, preparing the draft zoning bylaw, and there'll be one for reviewing the final draft.
Record time.
I told you I could talk fast and we kept it short. Trust me on this one, I can talk about this topic for more hours than you want to give me today. But I wanted to make sure that we did have time for any questions. I know it's a really high level, sort of 101. Some of you have sat through, I think, something similar a few years ago. So are there any questions that you guys have of us?
Go ahead.
All right, well, thanks, Your Worship, and thanks for your presentation. A quick question under what can the city regulate, and it goes back to the slide where it says the city can't regulate, landscaping specifics. Can you dig a little deeper on me for that? I thought we did have the ability to say, look, if we're going to approve this development permit for you, you're going to meet X, Y, and Z along with that. And it could be you're going to put grass in, you're going to put trees in, you're going to, so...
Yes, and you can do that, but it's going into the details of what specific type of tree they can put in, the specific number of trees they can put in. Sorry, you want to finish
No,
that up?
that's okay. Where it really comes into play is within the zoning bylaw, you cannot do this, but you have other tools and mechanisms at your disposal. So for example, your subdivision development servicing bylaw, you have the ability to request a landscaping plan for a developer to provide to you, particularly when you're dealing with bigger developments or subdivisions or multifamily or commercial. So that's not under the zoning bylaw regime, but other tools that you have at your disposal.
Okay, so we can regulate it, just not under the zoning. Okay.
Yeah, and you can't do it for single family homes, right? That's the other one.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Parslow.
So how can, in some areas in the Lower Mainland, you've got entire neighborhoods where there's the same, there's let's say, what I'm thinking of in particular, there's 4 designs of houses, 4 color schemes. Is that just entirely the developer rather than the municipal government requiring that?
Yes, so usually what that is a building scheme. So a developer will come in and say, I'm developing this large area of land. This is my vision for this development. They actually register a building scheme. It has to all be approved by the city, but the city still cannot, or the local government cannot tell them what to do. They've got this vision. And so when you go to build your home in that development, you're actually signing this building scheme with the developer saying, I will pick one of these 4 home styles. I'm okay with that. And so it's a separate agreement between the property owner and the developer of this larger development.
Okay. So one last comment. Some of our situations that we're going to be dealing with, I've been told, this is some time ago, that the only way of dealing with some of those is to Swiss cheese this particular property. By that they mean, well, this property is out of conformity, right? But we're not don't want to do anything about that, so we're just going to Swiss cheese it. And when I was shown some maps, some areas of Dawson Creek were a Swiss cheese with lots of holes in them. So do you see that as being a strong feature of the way we're going to have to go from your own studies or of our community? And I think the issue, some places having suites where they're not supposed to, or I'm not sure, I don't recall clearly what the issue was, but it seemed to me that the whole notion of Swiss cheesing was counter to having zoning, you know what I mean?
And again, part of that, I'm going to work my way through my thoughts here right now because they're all over, because there's a few things in your question there. Part of it, I think, really has to do with, what is the tolerance for nonconformity? Dawson Creek, when it was first built, the parcels were smaller. And so the zoning bylaw at that time was intended for those parcels. So now things have gotten bigger, you can do more, we have bigger building footprints and all these kinds of things that are being allowed, but we still have properties that could not, under today's zoning bylaw, if you will, do anything else to their property. So it's a little bit of, are we okay with them just staying the way they are? It's really not been an issue too far. Are you willing to have more zones to really specifically deal with that so that you don't have nonconformity? Do you want more zones in your zoning bylaw? Are you willing to enforce? Because one of the things that we often say is, a zoning bylaw is only as good as the enforcement behind it. So if you are not willing to enforce your zoning bylaw, then really does it matter what people are doing? Because they know that you're not going to enforce the regulations that they're supposed to be operating within. The other thing that we often say is that the zoning bylaw will not address every single issue that comes before you. I'm sorry, I've tried. I've done 15 of these and I still haven't figured it out. But we really try to write it so that it meets the needs of 90% of the people, 90% of the time. You're always gonna have the ones that are pushing the envelope. You're always gonna have the ones that really don't care and are gonna do whatever the heck they want because by golly, it's their property and that's the end of that. And you're gonna have the others that are going to try and abide by the regulations that they are supposed to be working within. So to get back to your question about are we going to be Swiss cheesing it, I don't know at this point. And I think some of that's going to come out with future workshops with yourselves where we kind of drill down into some of these issues. We're going to see what the public has to say. There's pros and cons to both.
I think Kevin had a comment as well.
Just, I think I know what you're speaking of, Councillor, which is when we went from allowing suites and duplexes, and then we made the changes to no longer allow, so there was a large contingent of non-conformity there. And the question at the time was, how do we deal with this moving forward? So it will be something that we have to consider and how we manage those legal non-conformities.
Well, I'm keen in on the word in your presentation, flexible, right? It seems to me the situation we're facing with, maybe we as a council need to indicate to you guys that we're willing to have more of a flexible approach to zoning rather than a very demarcated approach. Because if we do, I'd rather go that route than or I would suggest that the council is willing to be quite tolerant, right? That's my sense. I have no, just a culture of this place, which is great. And therefore, if we are, we maybe should signal that we're going to, as we get into this, a more flexible approach rather than a clearly demarcated single-family dwelling only, right? That we may want to just open it up. But that's just a thought, because I realize there's going to be a lot of exceptions in this community, and so why don't we just accept the fact that there are and get on with it?
Yeah, and I think if I just may add to that, one of the things to keep in mind is that, going back to your just single family comment, there are people, that's what they want. So I think we need, again, going to balancing a variety of perspectives and desires of the community. You are going to have those people that really just want to live in a single family neighborhood. They know their neighbor has a single family home and the rest of the street is that. And you're going to have others who would like to see more flexible, where you've got everything kind of mixed together, and that's totally okay. And so really giving some thought as to, are there areas where Dawson Creek would like to see more of that? Are there areas that we really do need to preserve to just have a certain type? And we keep talking about residential, but the same could be said for commercial, right? So really thinking that through a little bit, because I think you can do both, right? You can provide the flexibility, but still really give other people the option of, this is the kind of neighborhood I want to live within. And I think you can do both within your zoning bylaw.
Thank you. Councillor Wilbur?
Yeah, I just, through you to staff, and I guess the delegation as well, I just want to make sure and clarify that when we have our Good Neighbor workshops, that we include those members that were in that residential development committee, specifically, that they get invited, but also the information that came out of it becomes a part of this work moving forward, because I really see in having those conversations that we're going to hear again about rooming houses and parking specifically, which we've been working on. I mean, it's a long road, but I just want to make sure that it's included in that so that those people are also aware that we haven't forgot about it and that we're moving forward and we still value the input they give us. So, I mean, there's more, but specifically that group so that they know that yes, it's in a binder, but we have it and we are paying attention to what we heard then and probably some of the same things now. Maybe some of it's different.
Thank you. Councillor Lexstrom?
Thank you, Your Worship. And probably this is a question maybe to administration or previous council members. It was a great presentation. I think what I interpret is we're looking at a possible full rewrite of our zoning bylaws to I guess, capture. What has gone wrong with our zoning bylaw in the past that has led us to this point here today, I guess is what I'm curious about.
Sure. So through your worship, maybe Kevin can talk a little more about the process, but it really comes about from the OCP process and the OCP update, and now that requirement that we've gone through that and that's been approved, that our zoning bylaws now reflect that. And I don't know that it's huge change, but there's some key areas, and as I mentioned earlier on our residential development committee and the follow-up on our diary, that hits a couple of the bigger areas that council has indicated they'd like to see some consistency or some certainty in. And maybe Kevin.
Through your worship, one is the OCP. You must update following an OCP rewrite, which we've done. So that's one. Again, it's an opportunity because you've got an evolving community. Things are changing constantly. And based on feedback that we hear going through various development processes, you start to hear or recognize that there's issues with the bylaw. And maybe 5 years ago it wasn't an issue, but now it is for whatever reason. So you always have those moments of opportunity to try and refine as you go, try and reflect where the community is today and just make sure that best document moving forward. So I wouldn't say so much as what's gone wrong, it's just that things are changing and that's what we have to look at.
So there's a couple of things for me that I'm really interested in, and so first I'll talk about them in kind of the downtown. And so I think, yeah, as your community evolves from the 50s when your downtown core starts to build and you have these small independent businesses, and then all of a sudden, like any community, they start expanding out into the outer edges of your community with the big stores, the big box, and that changes the dynamics. We've seen that. And so, and I think to me, so we're putting pressure on to develop other commercial areas where you're putting more services in to develop new, but then your downtown starts to lack the development because, and so part of that is policy driven. And I'll give an example of that. So we say if you're going to develop downtown, you have to have 6 parking spots for every 1,000 meters of space that you develop. And so all of a sudden the costs of developing, the costs of building because of policy makes it unaffordable for somebody to make the investment into building in that downtown space. So that's a piece to me that I think we really have to look at, because I get and understand completely why you have the policy of off-street parking when you develop. But if it's not developing, you better look at what you're doing and why it's not doing it, because are there policies that are hindering the development of your community? And I think parking in downtown is kind of one of them. And then residential, and I'm having seen the development of our community now and more demand and more push towards density. And so we went from the old 60s and 70s, like you talk about, the lots went from 40-foot lots, 50-foot lots down over 105th, 106th, 107th, up to 75-foot lots by 125, these big, huge lots. And now they're back down, getting smaller and smaller. And so one of the components to me, I think, that we need to kind of consider in that is we now are providing these services and costs of services as it relates to how those residential properties are being developed. And so costs of waste collection, costs of snow removal are all impacted by that policy, I think, of lot size, parking, off-street parking, on-street parking, and all of that. And then the more density you provide, and we experience this when you talk about how good the developers are, they'll make sure their development works within your rules. And so we've experienced that because they're very innovative in terms of how they do it. And so to me, there's another aspect to us. So if you increase density or you you're increasing the costs of services that spread across everybody. And the entire community then pays for that additional cost because of your increasing density. And the thing that I've seen over the last 4 or 5 or 6 years, and we talked about people wanting a home with a suite in it to help as a mortgage helper, I think that density has been built by the investment community. People who are running them as businesses or commercial versus residential that we think about, traditionally residential. And we learned it, we saw it last year when we saw there was a big swing in the values of property in our community based on typical single family RS1 versus residential that was strata development. But there's no difference in the cost of taxation. So the rate per thousand you pay is exactly the same. And so there's another component. So now all of a sudden you're swinging costs of services onto single family versus the commercial operation of a residential investment property. And I think that's a component. Services are paid based on value of assessment, residential, commercial, business. But there's segments within that residential we learned that have a different valuation that impact how much they pay for services. And so there's a swing there to me. And that's a consideration I think we need to. And that's the box we're in of taxation, right? In terms of how assessment and the categories of assessment are only structured in a way that that's how you collect your property taxation. So anyway, there's just a couple of thoughts. And then the last one to me, honestly, I really like how the future of our community looks with residential and commercial and industrial. I see us having a real nice natural progression of how the commercial property is developing in the quadrants of the city and the industrial and how residential. I see that developing in a real nice way. And what our community has said in the OCP, we really like the feel of our community. And it was just a couple of comments. I'm really looking forward to the engagement with the community in it because I think there's the evolution of transition of how people view single family and commercial and all that stuff. And then for us, it's how we pay for the services. And snow removal's a biggie for us, and waste, and some of those that really they just are so clunky now in terms of how we try to provide that service when people are just, the streets are packed. And that's because there's no place else for them to park. Anyway, there's some.
Did you have a question there, Your Worship?
No, I was just they were asking for comments, so.
It formed some questions in my mind now.
Okay.
And also, through your worship, so we've had individuals come to council with some of their concerns as well, and so we'll ensure that we try to reach out to those individuals, make sure they're aware of these workshops, and if anybody has come forward to council with concerns, definitely when we have those dates, we'll give them to you so you can let them know. They can come forward and bring forward any of those areas they think need to be reviewed.
Yeah, I think 4 or 5 years ago we started that, right? The start of the residential committee. We met with every investor, developer, realtor, extended that out to them. I think we had 8 or 10 or 11 different sessions with them to get some feedback on our policies. Was it working? What was working? What wasn't? And it was really a good start of that residential development discussion. Councillor Wilbur, Councillor Parsons?
You formed a couple questions in my head. Well, maybe one question with 2 parts. Within this process, so you talked about secondary suites. Within this process, do we have, through you to staff, I guess, or our delegation, whoever has the answer, do we have the ability to charge for a permit for a secondary suite, and then they yearly have, say, a fire inspection?
So,
I mean, so that because to me, I see that as a way of, a neighbor's gonna say, "Ooh, that guy's got a secondary suite." Now all of a sudden, it becomes a part of this process. So we're still running on complaint basis, but at the same time, if somebody wants to put a suite in, onus is on them that it's built correctly, it's blah blah blah, and we're recouping some of that cost for some of those services.
So there's some logistics around this, but I sat through a session at UBCM where Tofino and Victoria and Vancouver had kind of a business licensing scheme, a permitting requirement. In particular, Airbnb was requiring this permit or else they wouldn't advertise. So there's some opportunities. We're just kind of at the tip of it right now, getting into it and looking at what our opportunities. What we understand is from previous discussions with previous councils and maybe this council, that there's a concern and we want to, ensure health and safety in some of these other areas, parking, et cetera. And so we're going to have to come up with some strategies to do that. This might be one of them.
Because, sorry, just to follow up, because technically, if you have a rental property, you should actually have a business license, because it's a business. You are renting property just as if you were a commercial or whatever. It's just like an apartment, building, whatever. So, yeah, so those are what framed my mind, is in recouping some of those costs. It technically is a business if you're collecting income off rental property.
So some communities, and I'm not saying this is where we'll move to, they're trying to create some equity between maybe an apartment that's at a commercial rate versus a residential rate, which are usually different, right? And so they're using business licensing schemes in other areas or other opportunities to try and equal out that playing field a little bit. So again, something we'll have to consider, and when we get that feedback from the residents and those concerns come forward, we'll have to identify some strategies. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I was just going to echo what you said. There are a number of municipalities, they are using the business license or getting a suite permit or something like that. And it's just set up within each local government. And I think there's just some thought that needs to be taken, because it is, again, you're not going to get everybody.
No.
You're going to get the ones
Swiss
that are
cheese.
like, I want to do this right. I'll follow the hoops, right? And that's totally fine. You're not going to know about all of them. So, there's potentially some liability concerns there. And it's a pretty gray kind of area that a lot of communities are doing it, but they're doing it more with that this is the intent, this is what we're trying to do. And we know that there's holes in that process, if you will, because the other piece that comes in, it's off of your comment about running it as a business, and for some, that's exactly what they do, whereas others might say, oh, well, I'm not running it as a business, I'm renting it to family, and so how do you, enforce things like that, and where do you draw that line? And you cannot regulate based on tenure or family members or things like that. So it's just being aware and going into sort of these conversations in whatever direction you move forward with your eyes wide open, and trying to ferret out those unforeseen implications, right? That we don't want to get ourselves into a worse situation or make things more difficult. But it's a fairly common practice to require a permit.
So just to follow up to that, Your Worship, if I can, just so I'm stating clearly from myself, and staff can keep that in mind, but rental income is rental income, and it's income, and that's business, regardless of family or not. So that's how I'm looking at it, and just so future conversations, I will still be holding that point.
Thank you.
You better.
Further comments or further questions? Councillor Parslow?
This is a curved ball, but it's a curious. I used to have a school board chairman. He always said I have a curious question. I watched a program, and it was about urban affairs. But there's many very large cities in the United States that have no zoning at all. Houston is one of them. Okay, so I'm talking major cities. Are there any communities you know of in BC that do not have zoning? Are they all required to, under the community charter, to have zoning?
I think all of them have, all of them have zoning bylaws. I can't think of any one that
Yeah, but are they required to by the community charter? I don't know.
I don't know about under the community charter.
It's not important. It just seemed to me. So the experience they talked about, the experience of Houston, and I honestly can't recall the other communities, but these are major cities, and their philosophy is, they certainly have rules about the quality of buildings, right? Safety stuff. But this was zoning. Just letting that market forces dictate. And you know what? That kind of appeals to me. Just let the free enterprise system.
So what are we building next to Parslow's house?
Conversation here.
Was a curious conversation.
This from the guy who lives in the regional district?
Hey, how cold does it get in Houston in the winter?
We've got a great variety of houses where I live.
Thank you. Any further questions for anybody else got a curious one? So, thank you. That was very good, and I know this will be a really engaging piece of what we're going to do over the next 6 months to address this and understand this. So, appreciate you guys coming in today and giving us a kickstart on it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Any other business for council? Motion to adjourn. Councillor Wilbur, Councillor Kemp, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.